Well, there's no law in New York City that says anyone has to use a particular restroom. I mean, one can always be arrested, and we have seen cops.
This is a woman using the women's bathroom.
No, right. Clearly, in this case, it is nothing like that.
But I mean, the law in New York, because we also have transgender rights, or gender identity or expression or whatever, is that you can use the restroom with which you identify. Correct?
That's correct, and with which you
the law
in the way you express yourself. So, meaning you couldn't walk into a women's restroom, or you wouldn't necessarily be within the protection of our civil rights laws if you were dressed in your suit and tie that way and clearly presenting as a male in a non-single user women's restroom.
Yeah.
But I think we should be clear too, just to make sure. Khadijah's not transgender.
Right.
Khadijah's born female. She is female, and happens to be a lesbian
and was using the women's
looks
restroom.
masculine. Right.
So then you tried to follow up with the restaurant the next day.
Absolutely. I wanted them to be made aware of what happened. Again, sometimes things happen in places of business where this is a 3-chain restaurant, and the guy that should know what happened doesn't, and he never finds out about it. So, my point in calling them was basically just to let them know that, your bouncer was extremely, extremely rude and nasty, and the way that he handled the situation was totally unprofessional. I personally feel like he had an obligation to both patrons. He had an obligation to the person, assuming that the person reported me, and he kind of had an obligation to me as well. But he didn't do that, and I think he handled it. The way that he handled it was totally disgusting.
And what kind of response did you get?
I got a, we'll talk about compensation as far as, coming to have dinner with us here for free, or, and again, I wasn't very condescending, very much so an insult of my intelligence, to be quite frank. And
because you don't want to go back to the Caliente cab company.
I wouldn't step foot back in there ever again. Right. And I would urge anyone that has any decency about, civil rights, about, gay and lesbian and transgender community to not patronize.
And what does it say on Pride Day that we can't, in the heart of Greenwich Village, close down a restaurant that treats a lesbian customer this way? What does it say about our movement? It's really a rhetorical question. Like
it is a rhetorical question.
I think it's a pretty pathetic movement. I'm glad the Queer Justice League is out there, but where is everybody else? Where is everybody else?
Sunday at 1 p.m. we'll be back there. Now this has grown, Michael. This has grown into a bigger deal and an attempted negotiation and maybe a court case.
Oh, absolutely. We have been talking to Caliente, and their response to the community has been to flip us the bird. They are not interested in a serious negotiation or resolving this in any way that acknowledges that they've done wrong and that really says we want to do right by the LGBT community.
Well, you try. I'd like to know, first of all, Khadijah, how it got from you're trying to negotiate individually with the restaurant, or not even negotiate, just inform them, to then going to seek help from a lawyer or a law firm. Or
I was raised by a very, very strong man. My grandfather amazingly has taught me a lot about just my African American history and just my history in general. And after discussing the situation with my mother, it was clear that I couldn't be quiet about my civil rights being violated. This is ridiculous. I mean, how many people have died? How many dollars have we spent to make sure that things like this do not happen? And it's like in 2007 on Gay Pride, something like this did happen. So it wasn't an incident that I was willing to just stay quiet about. I felt it very necessary to make people aware of this business who is in the heart of the village, and they're flying the gay flag, and we're patronizing them, and we're not welcome, basically.
We didn't see any gay flags out there on Sunday.
Oh, no, they were down the next day. Actually.
So how did you then find help and representation?
I actually gave Christine Quinn a call. I gave her office a call, and that's where I was able to get Michael Silverman's number. I was able to get the number. That office was extremely helpful.
So they referred you to him and his office. And Michael, what happened when Khadijah called?
We immediately invited Khadijah in. We conducted our usual intake, decided she had, some very serious claims here. I mean, and let's, not just point, the finger sort of and think of this as just an LGBT issue. I mean, what we're essentially talking about is gender stereotyping in a public accommodation. Khadijah was not feminine enough to be in there. And that's something that, in New York City in 2007 has to touch a nerve with a lot of people, with a lot of women, whether they're lesbian or straight. And the
giveaway there is that they wouldn't look at her ID. They didn't care
Right.
that she was actually female.
Right.
They only cared how she looked.
Right.
And that's shocking.
Right, and you know do you have to wear pearls to go into the women's restroom in New York City in 2000? I mean, is that what they're telling us? Is that what's
Christine
happening?
Quinn has
now?
started wearing them.
Oh, she's worn them for a long time. All right, so then what do you decide to do?
You know, we did what we did with every client. We said, look, here are your options, here are your legal options, and you know, why don't you think about this for a little bit, decide if you feel the personal wherewithal to go forward with this. Because being a plaintiff in a civil rights lawsuit, or even something that falls short of a lawsuit but ends up just being a civil rights action, takes a lot of fortitude. And we spoke to Khadijah the next day, and she said, I'm ready to go forward. And we said, we are ready to go forward. This is an issue that we deeply believe in. For, this is an issue that cuts across, as I said, it's not just about the LGBT community, it's not just about lesbians, it's about transgender people, it's about lesbians, it's about
It's sex discrimination,
women.
it's gender discrimination.
Absolutely.
So this lawsuit could take place any place in this country?
The lawsuit would take place most likely here in New York. Where
No, it could take place anywhere in the country. Anyone could bring a complaint like this anywhere in the country.
Sure, so I mean,
it's sex discrimination,
right.
essentially.
Well, there's actually no federal, without getting into too many details, we're in a public accommodation context, not employment, and there's actually not a federal law that protects from gender discrimination in public accommodations, probably because it doesn't arise that often. How many times do you think it happens, other than to a certain class of women that is deemed too masculine, that they're being given a hassle in places like bathrooms or locker rooms? So there's really no federal law, actually, so we're dealing with state and local law.
So first of all, you had to figure out what exactly